What's up guys, it's Steven from Pal's Power Ups, and I have a tutorial video for you guys on accent LEDs with the Crystal Focus X. So I'm going to try to move through this as quickly as I can. We got a lot of ground to cover, but I was requested to do a video on this, and or it was requested. Some LEDs that you can use as accent LEDs. The first type I'm going to talk about, there's three types that I'm going to talk about. The first one is onboard LEDs, much like you see the ones blinking right here that I demoed. They come in packs that look like this. I get these off of Amazon. I'll share the links to these types of LEDs and some others in the description below. They're SMD 0603 LEDs. The packages are even fancy enough. They come with the forward voltage and the maximum amperage that they can take. That is also important because it's going to help you to calculate what type of resistor that you need, or what ohm resistor you need for these, okay? The same type of resistor you'll need is a 0603 SMD. I'll put a link down in the description with a video to take you to a video that talks about how to calculate your the resistor that you need. Another type of LED that can be used as an accent LED is just a basic single diode LED. So these are red ones, okay? These can also be found on Amazon. These are all super cheap. Another LED, the third type I'll talk about, is LEDs that are in your switches. So a lot of the switches out there have LEDs. All three are gonna pretty much be almost the same as far as configuring them and whatnot. The only thing that's different is how they're wired up. So I have the camera set up like this just to kind of help, show things. I'm going to go to the manual. I think that's where we're going to start as far as wiring is concerned, because they're all wired differently. So page 25 in the manual is where they talk about the different types of wiring and how you would set up LEDs. So LEDs that are like this, or LEDs that might be in a switch, like these you might use for a switch or an area of your chassis that you want to light up, or maybe you want to use these in a crystal chamber, and then a switch might have its own LED. Those are going to be what's called external LEDs, so it talks about that right here. External LEDs are going to be wired up with the pads, okay? So we have have an actual crystal focus board here. We have eight pads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the same exact thing is on the other side. Okay, now these are the same. These go to the same thing. It's not 16 total, it's just 8, okay? But if you were gonna wire up one of those LEDs, you would use these pads here as the positives, the positive lines, okay? Then the negative line, so if you look here, says accent LEDs return ground, is this one right here. So you'll have 3 little holes at the bottom, and this one right here, the first big hole next to those 3, is the ground. So if you had all those LED positives coming out, all the grounds would come right back to this one hole right here. Okay, the first big one. And it talks about that. It points to it right there in the manual. See that right there? That would be for LEDs like this, or LEDs that would be in switches. If you had an LED in a switch, you would have a positive on there and a negative on there for the LED, and then you would have a positive and negative on there for the actual switch mechanism itself, whether that be momentary or latching. And then those would go to different pads, but we're not going to talk about that. Now, if you wanted to do onboard SMD LEDs, like what I have right here that's blinking in the background, okay, they can do all kinds of stuff like this. You can make them turn on and off, do certain sequences, they can pulse, they can do blinking, they can do more sequences. We'll discuss that in a second, but those types of LEDs are actually soldered right onto the board directly, okay? Now, they would still need resistors too, and they would go on the back side. And you know what I forgot to mention with the external? With the external LEDs, the wiring for them would come out of these pads right here, okay? But the resistor for that would be the corresponding pads next to it. So like the 8th pad, this one, the 7th, that one. The resistors would be here. Now, if you were going to do onboard LEDs like the ones blinking here, you would solder them onto the board, and then the corresponding pads on the back is where you would put the resistor. Now you have some flexibility here. The front or back can be the top or bottom. So if you have a board in your Saber where the SD card is on top, you can put the LEDs up here, and then your resistors would go on the bottom. Now, if your board in your Saber has the micro SD port on top, your LEDs would go here, and your resistors would go on the bottom. So you got some flexibility there. You can do it either way. Kind of like here, you see I have the LEDs on top here, and then I have the resistors on the underside. See them all soldered up there? Those little tiny ones. Put this back down. So that is how you would pretty much, wire them up. It's pretty simple. You can't really get that wrong. Positives are the pads. Man, I hate this mouse. The positive are these pads right here. And then the return ground for external LEDs is here. And then if you do onboard SMDs, it just goes directly on with the LED on one side, the resistor on the other. Now, if I didn't mention it earlier, I'll mention it one more time. These packages come with forward voltage and the maximum amps that they can handle. And you need to use those along with the size battery that you're using, the voltage, to calculate the resistor you need. So I'll put a link in the description below with how to calculate that. So that is hardware and wiring, right? That's the LEDs and wiring them up. Now we're going to talk about actually configuring them and telling them what to do so they can do cool stuff like the ones you see blinking here. So the place where you do that is inside of each font. So let me minimize all this. So here I have a standard font package that would be on the SD card. And I have one font on here. It's the Force Awakens Kylo Ren. I'm going to go inside of it. You'll see all your wave files or your sound files for booting, blasting, clashing, swinging, all of the above. You also should have a file in here called LEDs, text document. This is where we're going to go and configure LEDs. If your fonts don't have these, because lots of times when you buy them from font makers, they don't include the LED text, you can go to the Plector Lab website. You can download the stock font package, which contains all of these fonts here, and you can grab any one of these LED files, copy, paste it into your new ones. So like here's one. You could just copy and paste it into your new font, okay? So here we have the LED file. We're going to open it. So this is what it looks like, okay? You have, first of all, let's note something. Programming these LEDs are going to tell them what to do. When to turn on, when to turn off, to pulse, to blink, to work as a emitter cooldown, to work as a power level indicator. There's all kinds of roles that they can do. Those roles can be found in the manual starting on page 83. Yes, starting on page 83 right here, accent LED roles. So right here, all these bullet points talk about all the different things that the accent LEDs can do. Okay, now it is important to note, okay, and it even says it right here in the very top of LED text file, that not every LED, not every accent LED can do the same or can do all the roles, okay? Only numbers 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8 can have advanced roles using PWM, okay? Which I had to Google what that even was. It means pulse width modulation. which is basically a really fancy term for saying that those pads 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are able to vary the amount of voltage, which allows them to pulse and flicker. Accent pads numbers 1, 3, and 4 are not able to do this. They can pretty much only turn on and off. They cannot pulse or flicker. So some of those roles, when it comes to like mirroring what the blade does, or pulsing, or doing audio flickering, numbers 1, 3, and 4 will not be able to do that. They'll only be able to be on at full brightness or totally off. Because of that, you'll probably want to configure them a special way. So if you notice when I turn mine on, I have some pads pulsing and I have some pads mirroring. So if you watch my LEDs down here, when I turn it on, you'll see these 4 pads 5, 6, 7, and 8 are pulsing. And since pads 1, 3, and 4 can't do that, I made 1, 2, 3, and 4 just do a sequence where they bounce back and forth. So you're going to have to kind of plan that out ahead of time, think how you want your LEDs to function based off of that, that one limiting factor that accents 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are the only ones that can do pulsing, audio flickering, and mirroring. So moving on, here is the basic format for what the LED text file contains. There's 5 sequences of when they can be controlled, pretty much. During power on, during power off, during LEDs, which means while the blade is on, during idle, which means while the blade is off, and during lockup. Okay, now each one of those sequences, you have 2 parts. You have an upper part up here, you have accents pulse depth, and accents pulse length. Okay, now accent pulse depth and length are always going to be there, and they're always going to have numbers. Even though you might not use them, you still want them to be there. Okay, pulse depth and length refers to if you're making the LEDs, the accent LEDs pulse, how deep they pulse and the time frame that they're pulsing. Okay, so this is like 300 milliseconds. It'll take 300 milliseconds for it to pulse down to 90 and return to 100. Sorry, down to 90 and return to 100 or 0. The first one is the most important part of this. Okay, accents. There are 8 spots here. Okay, so 8 spots, 8 LEDs. So if I were to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the first spot controls the first LED pad, the second spot, the second pad, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and 8th pad, okay? And so on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I wanted the last 4 pads, numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8, to do some mirroring of what the blade is doing, which I like to use small b, lowercase b, then I would make, little b's there. So I'll show you where I'm getting that from, okay? If I go back to the manual, if I look up little b, which is right here, relative brightness to the current blade color profile says we'll make an accent mirror the blade pulse and flicker independently. So that means it's going to mirror the blade pulsing and flickering. Let me go back to that. Okay, so then later on you'll see in my power off I have different things. I have capital T's here because during my power off sequence I wanted some emitter cooldown. So you'll see capital T here stands for emitter cooldown over a fixed fade out time. Okay, which it says it uses the actual pulse length there. So the last 4 LED pads, numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8, over 300 milliseconds during power off are going to do an emitter cooldown effect. So if you watch when I do that, if you watch these last 4 right here, they're going to do a fade out. All right, so that's on, right? These last 4 that are pulsing right here, they're gonna dim down like an emitter cooldown. Watch them. See that? It's quick. I'll do it again. It's a 300 milliseconds. They're basically just gonna fade off. See that? All right, so you can basically configure LEDs to do different things. Now, the little letter A is the most basic thing you can do, which basically just tells an LED when to be on and when to be off. It's to sequence it, okay? Now, how that's done is the second part of every sequence. Okay, so right here we have 2 types that you can do. You can make things repeat a certain number of times and then stop. Or you'll see later on down here I have stuff where it goes on forever. So you can make things go on forever like that, or you can make things repeat a certain amount of times and stop. So again, just like with accents, the numbers here during state represent the pads. A 1 means that it's on, a 0 means that it's off. So pad 1 is on, pad 2 is off, pad 1 is on, pad 2 is off. I'm sorry, pad 1 is on, pad 2 is off, 3 is on, 4 is off, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are on. Now you'll notice during that sequence I have 5, 6, 7, and 8 on all the time because they're doing something different. Remember, they are mirroring the blade pulsing and flickering. But the first 4 accents, I want them to bounce on and off at certain times. So the first 4 in these sequences, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are going to change. So you'll see the odd ones are on here, and then the even ones are on here. Now, I have this sequence repeating 8 times, so it's going to bounce back and forth 8 times, and then it's going to stop. Okay? Now, how quickly it's going to do that is determined by the delay. The delay is a measurement in time for milliseconds. So it's going to do this first state for 50 milliseconds, and then it's going to do the next one for 50 milliseconds, and then it's going to bounce back and forth 8 times. So that's 50 times 8 is 350 total milliseconds to run that sequence. Okay? Now, if you watch my power on, watch the LEDs down here, you'll see it run that sequence. I'll do it again. Watch the first 4 LEDs at the top. They're going to bounce back and forth doing that sequence. Whoops, I clicked it twice. While the first or the last 4 are mirroring the blade, what the blade would be doing. So you'll see them just come on and be bright. All right, so I hope that made sense. I know that is a lot of explanation. If you have any questions at all, please just put your questions down in the comments and I will help you. But I am going to continue to move on a little bit more. So power on is a quick sequence. That's why I have the delay set at 50 and this thing moving so quickly. The same thing with power off. I have this one repeating 8 times, also with a quick delay, and it's moving very quickly because power off doesn't last very long either. Now, during LEDs, while your blade is on, and during idle, while your blade is off, you have a lot of time there where you don't need to make them hurry up. So this is where you can get fancy with sequences, okay? So you see during my blade off, you see my LED is down here blinking this certain pattern. All I did was create that pattern with 1s and 0s. 1s meaning I want that pad to turn on, 0 meaning I want that pad to be off, and then I created a sequence and I put a time on it. So you see this delay is 200 milliseconds. It's going to hold each one of these states for 200 milliseconds before it moves on to the next one, which is why it moves kind of slow. And then we just get that nice little pattern. And because idle is a long time that it could be on, you know, I made this go for forever and I didn't make it repeat a certain number. I just wanted it to go on for forever. So it's just going to repeat this whole, once it gets to the last one, it starts back at the first one and it's just going to repeat this whole sequence forever until I change to the next one. So maybe now I'll go to the LEDs sequence, which is this one right here. And this is what's gonna happen while my blade is on. So I'm gonna turn it on, but I'm gonna turn my volume off so that you can hear me talk. But the blade is still on. So if we go back to, let me minimize rice. If we go back to the sequence here, if you look at my first 4 letters are just A's. That means those first 4 pads are being used as just regular accent LEDs. They are being told when to turn off and when to turn on by this pattern that I have set up here, which is basically just set up with 1s and 0s again, back and forth telling those LEDs when to turn on and off. And I have the delay set at 50 milliseconds so that it does it fast. And I just think it doing fast while the blade is on is kind of cool. Now the last 4, remember those are pads that are able to do pulsing and flickering, so I decided to make them pulse. That little wave symbol there, if we go back to our manual, you'll see here the little wave symbol means accent is pulsing on its own. Okay, so I set up those LEDs to pulse down to 99% off and then back up to 0. So you see they blink almost all the way off. And then the timing I have set for that is 400 milliseconds. So it takes 400 milliseconds for it to blink on and off, on and off. Okay, and then because I want those to constantly do that, I made the last 4 LEDs of each sequence be a 1 because I want it to constantly do that. See that? So this sequencing can be done whether you're using an entire board like this, like all 8 pads, or maybe you're just using 1 pad, right? If you're just using 1 pad, you could still just set it up with 8 like here, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then maybe in your sequence, if you were only ever using pad 5, then you would go 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th one would always be a 1, or whenever you wanted it to be on, right? And maybe that 5th one is a switch, you know? Maybe you want that switch to pulse. Then you would put a pulse symbol in the 5th spot, right there. You would make sure that that 5th number here is a 1, because that's when you want that pad to have power, you know? And then you would, you know, say how deep you want it to pulse, maybe 99, and you would say how long, maybe 400 milliseconds. So I know that was a lot to take in, 22, 23-minute video is what it says. I hope that maybe something in this video helped you wrap your brain around accent LEDs. If you have any more questions about this stuff, just comment below and I will gladly respond and help you guys out. Thanks for tuning in and catch you later.